Call security. Now. Claire Whitmore said it without raising her voice, which somehow made it colder. The words cut across the 42nd floor of Harrington Global like a door locking from the outside. For half a second, the executive reception area stayed exactly as it had been. Polished marble under bright white lights, glass walls reflecting the gray Manhattan morning, assistants moving between desks with tablets in hand, the soft hum of the heating system pushing warm air against the tall windows. Then everything stopped. A pen paused above a signature pad. A printer clicked once and went silent. 3 junior analysts near the espresso machine turned their heads slowly, as if one wrong movement might make them part of whatever had just begun. In the center of it all stood Marcus Ellison, 6 feet 2 inches tall, shoulders straight beneath a dark gray 3-piece suit that looked too carefully tailored for anyone to mistake him for Lost. His light blue shirt was crisp. His deep burgundy tie rested perfectly against his vest. His hair was cut close and neat, his beard shaped with quiet precision, and in his right hand he carried a worn brown leather briefcase with softened corners, the kind of object that did not match the glass and steel perfection around him because it had survived too much real life to pretend. Claire's eyes had gone there first, to the briefcase, then to his face, then to the visitor badge resting against his jacket, printed only with his last name because the downstairs lobby system had not yet updated his executive credentials. Ellison. No title. No department. No warning that the man she had just cornered was expected in the boardroom in less than 10 minutes. Marcus did not step back. He did not smile to make her comfortable. He simply looked at her with the calm patience of a man who had spent his entire life learning how to breathe through rooms that questioned his right to enter them. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock meeting with the board." Claire gave a small, polished laugh that did not reach her eyes. She was in her mid-30s, blonde hair pulled into a tight professional twist. Navy business suit immaculate, white blouse buttoned cleanly beneath a narrow gold necklace. Everything about her had been selected to say control. Her posture, her tone, the way she held her tablet like a shield. Behind her, framed portraits of former chief executives lined the wall, every one of them pale, older, and smiling with the comfort of men who had never been asked to prove they belonged in the room named after them. Claire glanced at those portraits, then back at Marcus. "Everyone says they have a meeting when they're caught on the wrong floor," she said. A faint shift moved through the office. Not a gasp, not yet. Just the collective tightening of people deciding whether to witness or disappear. Marcus heard it. He also saw the young black intern standing near the copy station, a slim kid in a borrowed blazer, frozen with a stack of reports against his chest. The intern's eyes dropped to the floor as soon as Marcus looked his way, and that small gesture landed harder than Claire's words. It was recognition, not of Marcus, but of the situation, of the old pattern wearing new carpet and expensive lighting. Claire lifted the radio clipped to her waistband. "Executive reception, 42. I need security up here." Static answered her first, thin and sharp. Then a man's voice replied, "Copy that." Marcus's fingers tightened once around the handle of his briefcase. Inside it was a letter from his father, folded along the same creases for 23 years, the paper soft from being opened on days when pride felt expensive. "Walk into every room like you belong there, son, but never forget who they refuse to see." That morning, Marcus had read those words in the back of a black sedan crossing the Queensboro Bridge, while the skyline rose ahead of him like a promise and a test. He had not expected applause when he arrived. He had not expected warmth. But he had hoped, quietly, foolishly perhaps, that the first door he opened as chief executive would not become a mirror of every door his mother had been made to enter through the side. "You can check the board calendar," Marcus said. "My name is on it." Claire's mouth tightened. "I don't need to check a calendar to know when someone is out of place." The sentence landed, and this time the silence changed shape. It became heavier, more honest, too large for the marble floor beneath them. Marcus looked past her through the glass wall to the boardroom, where 12 leather chairs waited around a long walnut table, each place set with bottled water, folders, and name cards turned neatly toward the door. At the head of the table, one card stood alone. He could not read it from where he stood, but he already knew what it said. Marcus Ellison, Chief Executive Officer. He drew one slow breath, feeling the cooled air fill his chest, feeling the eyes on him, feeling the old pressure to explain himself gently enough to be allowed dignity. Then he looked back at Claire, not angry, not pleading, only awake. "Would you have asked me that," he said, "if I looked like the men in those portraits behind you?" Claire blinked once. The radio at her waist crackled again. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. 2 security officers stepped out onto the 42nd floor, and every face in the reception area turned toward them as if judgment itself had just arrived. The taller of the 2 officers stepped forward first, one hand resting near his radio, his face arranged into the professional blankness of someone trained to calm situations before they turned public. The second officer remained half a pace behind him, eyes moving from Claire to Marcus to the silent staff behind the glass partitions. Marcus noticed all of it. He noticed the way the officers did not reach for him, but also did not greet him. He noticed the way Claire relaxed the moment they arrived, as if the building itself had finally agreed with her. He noticed the intern by the copy station holding the reports so tightly the pages had begun to bend. "Sir," the taller officer said, careful but firm, "we are going to need you to come with us to the lobby." Marcus looked at him, then at the elevator doors still open behind them, glowing with soft white light. "And what reason were you given?" he asked. The officer hesitated just long enough for the answer to become visible. A concern about unauthorized access. To the executive floor. Claire lifted her chin. He refused to leave when questioned. Marcus turned his eyes toward her. His expression did not change, but something in the room tightened around the lie. He had not refused. He had answered. There was a difference, and everyone who had heard it knew there was a difference. But nobody spoke. That was the old machinery of rooms like this. The harm rarely came from one voice alone. It came from all the quiet people who knew better and chose their shoes, their screens, their coffee cups, anything but the truth. Marcus slowly placed his briefcase on the reception counter. The leather made a soft, tired sound against the stone. It had belonged to his father, Calvin Ellison, a bus mechanic from Newark who carried invoices in it during the week and church programs in it on Sundays. Calvin had never owned a corner office. He had never worn a suit that cost more than a month of groceries. But he had polished his shoes every morning before sunrise because he believed dignity was something a man put on before the world tried to take it off. Marcus remembered being 12 years old, standing in the doorway of their small kitchen, watching his father tie a dark blue necktie before going to meet a bank manager who would still call him by his first name too quickly and deny him a loan too politely. His mother, Elaine, had stood behind him, smoothing the shoulders of his jacket with both hands. "Let them see you clearly," she had whispered. Calvin had smiled at that, tired but proud. Some people look straight at you and still decide not to see. That sentence had followed Marcus through every mile of his life. Through Howard University, where he worked nights shelving freight at a hardware store and studied finance until 2 in the morning. Through his first analyst job in Chicago, where clients asked if he was the assistant before asking for the numbers he had built himself. Through boardrooms in Boston, Atlanta, and Seattle, where he learned that power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it sat still, listened longer than expected, and let careless people reveal the truth. Harrington Global had not brought him here by accident. 6 months earlier, when the company was bleeding clients and hiding panic behind polished press releases, Marcus had led the private rescue that kept its doors open. He had found the debt structure no one wanted to explain, negotiated with creditors who thought the company was already dead, and convinced the board that Harrington could survive only if it stopped rewarding appearance over judgment. The acquisition had stayed confidential until that morning. Even Claire, who prided herself on knowing everything before anyone else, had been given only fragments. New ownership, new leadership, 9 o'clock board announcement. No photograph, no biography, no familiar face to prepare herself for. So when Marcus arrived with no entourage, no assistant rushing ahead of him, no silver nameplate already clearing the path, she saw not the man who had saved the company, but the man her fear and bias had prepared her to question. "Sir," the officer repeated, softer now, "please pick up your briefcase and follow us." Marcus lowered his gaze to the worn leather handle. For one brief moment, the entire 42nd floor seemed to shrink into the space between his hand and that bag. He thought of his father's note inside. He thought of his mother's hands smoothing a jacket that never received the respect it deserved. Then he looked back at the officer and said, quietly enough that people leaned in to hear him, "I will come with you if you are ordering me to leave. But before I do, I want everyone here to remember exactly what made you think I should not be allowed to stay." The younger officer glanced toward Claire, waiting for instruction that should have come from procedure, not from her expression. Marcus saw that, too. The entire scene had become a lesson in how authority traveled through a room without anyone naming it. Claire did not wear a badge. She did not own the building. Yet the officers looked to her because she looked like someone the building had already approved. Marcus stood beside the reception counter, his briefcase resting under his hand, and felt the old mathematics working itself out in real time. 1 polish manager, 2 uniformed officers, 1 black man being asked to explain why he was not a problem. "Before anyone escorts me anywhere," Marcus said, "I would like this handled according to policy." Claire's eyes narrowed. "Policy is exactly what I am following. Then the policy should be easy to show." His voice remained even, almost gentle, and that gentleness bothered her more than anger would have. Anger would have given her something to label: defiance, instability, a scene. But Marcus offered none of that. He offered only clarity, and clarity had a way of making careless people sound cruel. "The visitor system gave me access to this floor," he continued. "I passed the lobby desk. I used an authorized elevator. I stated the meeting I was here for. You have not checked the calendar, contacted the board office, or asked for identification beyond the badge your own building printed for me." The taller officer shifted his weight, suddenly aware that several employees were listening too closely. Claire stepped forward, lowering her voice as if volume could make her words more professional. "You came onto an executive floor during a confidential transition morning. You refused to understand that this area is restricted." "I understood you perfectly," Marcus said. "You decided I was restricted." The words did not strike the room. They settled into it, quiet and heavy, like dust revealed by sunlight. On the far side of reception, the young intern finally looked up. His name was Evan Brooks, though Marcus did not know it yet. Evan had arrived 3 weeks earlier from a state college in Maryland, still learning which conference rooms required reservations and which executives preferred printed copies over digital files. He had spent every morning trying to become invisible enough to make no mistakes. But watching Marcus now, Evan felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not safety. Not yet. Recognition with a spine. Claire noticed him staring and gave him a sharp look. Evan lowered his eyes again, but not before Marcus saw the flicker. That was enough. Marcus turned back to Claire. "Call the board office." "Excuse me." "Call the board office," he repeated. "Ask whether Marcus Ellison is expected at 9 o'clock. A small crease appeared between Claire's brows. It was not uncertainty, exactly. It was the irritation of being asked to verify what prejudice had already made convenient. She lifted her tablet, tapped once, then stopped before opening the calendar. Her thumb hovered above the screen. Around them, the floor held its breath. Through the glass wall behind her, the boardroom waited in perfect order: 12 chairs, 12 folders, 12 bottles of still water reflecting the ceiling lights. Behind the closed door, people with private equity titles and careful smiles were preparing to meet the man they believed was still downstairs being welcomed by staff. Claire lowered the tablet without checking. "The board is not available for walk-in claims." Marcus looked at the tablet, then back at her. "You did not check." "I do not need to." "Why?" The question was so simple that for a second she had no answer. The officers looked at her. The receptionist looked at her. Evan looked at the floor, but his ears sharpened. Claire's face tightened, color rising faintly beneath her makeup. "Because I know how these situations work." Marcus nodded once, slowly, as if she had finally said the honest thing beneath all the polished ones. "So do I." The taller officer cleared his throat. "Sir, maybe we can clear this up downstairs." "No," Marcus said, still calm. "We can clear it up here, where the mistake was made." Claire drew herself taller. "This is not a negotiation." "It never is," Marcus replied. "Not when someone has already decided who deserves the benefit of the doubt." The reception area went still again, but this time the silence did not belong to Claire. It had moved. It gathered around Marcus, not as noise, not as rescue, but as witness. Then, from behind the boardroom door, a phone began to ring. The sound was clean, bright, and impossible to ignore. Claire turned toward it, annoyed by the interruption. Marcus did not move. He only rested his hand lightly on the old leather briefcase and waited while the building that had tried to keep him out began, slowly, to call his name. The phone rang 3 times before anyone moved. Each bright tone seemed to strike the glass walls and return sharper, as if the entire executive floor had become an instrument tuned to discomfort. Claire stared toward the boardroom door, then back at Marcus, weighing which threat mattered more, the unknown call behind her or the composed man in front of her who refused to shrink. At last, she snapped her fingers toward the receptionist. Close the boardroom line. They can call back. The receptionist, a young woman named Paige with a pale face and nervous hands, reached for the console but stopped when Marcus spoke. You may want to answer that. Claire turned slowly. You are not in a position to advise anyone here. Marcus said nothing. That was the part Claire hated most. He did not give her the satisfaction of looking offended. He did not perform fear. He simply stood beneath the cold ceiling lights with one hand on a worn leather briefcase, steady enough to make the room feel unstable around him. The taller officer took a half step closer. Sir, we need to resolve this now. Then resolve it correctly, Marcus said. Verify my appointment. Claire cut in before the officer could respond. No, we are past that. Her voice was crisp, but underneath it something had begun to fray. She looked at the 2 officers and pointed toward the reception counter. Have him open the bag. The room changed again. Not dramatically. No one gasped. No one objected. But several eyes dropped. A senior accountant at the edge of the hallway suddenly became fascinated by the screen of his phone. Paige stared at the console as if the buttons had rearranged themselves into a language she did not understand. Evan Brooks held the reports against his chest and swallowed hard. Marcus looked at Claire for a long second. On what basis? Security precaution, she said. For whom? Claire's lips parted, then closed. The question did not need volume. It had already exposed too much. The taller officer looked uncomfortable now, but procedure, once misused, had a momentum of its own. Sir, he said quietly, would you please open the briefcase? Marcus glanced down at the old leather. For the first time that morning, something passed across his face that was not calm. It was brief, almost invisible, but Evan saw it. Pain, not from embarrassment alone, but from the private insult of having a father's memory treated like a suspicious object. Marcus unclipped the brass latches. The sound was small, but everyone heard it. Inside were 3 items placed with deliberate care: a slim black folder sealed with a red tab, a pair of reading glasses, and a folded letter, yellowed at the edges from years of being carried close. Claire leaned in just enough to look, careful not to appear curious. The red tab on the folder read, Harrington Transition Materials, Confidential. Her eyes flickered. It should have made her pause. It should have made her ask the question she had avoided since the moment Marcus stepped out of the elevator. Instead, fear chose pride. Anyone can print a folder label, she said. The words were so poor, so thin, that even she seemed to hear it. Marcus closed the briefcase slowly. Yes, he said, and anyone can wear a title badly. The taller officer inhaled through his nose and looked away. Claire's face hardened. Escort him to the lobby. Paige finally found her voice, barely above a whisper. Ms. Whitmore, the board line is still flashing. Ignore it. It is marked urgent. I said ignore it. That command traveled through the room like cold water under a door. Marcus turned his head slightly toward Paige. Answer it. Claire stepped between them. Do not take orders from him. Paige's hand trembled above the console. The phone kept flashing, silent now, red against the polished desk. In the boardroom, through the frosted glass, shadows moved behind the closed door. Someone inside was standing. Someone was checking a watch. The 9 o'clock meeting was beginning without the one person it could not begin without. The younger officer reached for the visitor badge clipped to Marcus's jacket. He did not grab it. He only held out his palm. I need the badge, sir. Marcus looked at the hand, then unclipped the badge himself and placed it there with careful dignity. The plastic card looked absurdly small between them, cheap and temporary, as if the building had reduced him to the flimsiest proof of presence it could offer. Evan could not stay quiet anymore. He asked you to check, he said. His voice cracked slightly, but it carried. Every head turned. Claire looked at him as if he had stepped across an invisible line painted years before he was born. What did you say? Evan's face flushed, but he did not look down this time. He asked you to check the calendar. You did not. The silence after that was different. It had a heartbeat. Claire stared at Evan, then at Marcus, and for one dangerous second her composure slipped completely. You are all forgetting who is responsible for this floor, she said. Marcus picked up his briefcase. No, he replied softly. I think this floor is about to learn who has been responsible for it. Before Claire could answer, the private elevator at the end of the hall chimed. Its doors opened with a smooth silver whisper, and a man in a dark security director's uniform stepped out, holding a sealed executive file against his chest. The man from the private elevator did not rush, and that made his arrival feel heavier. He was older than the two floor officers, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and a dark security director's uniform pressed so sharply it seemed to hold the light. A silver nameplate on his chest read Daniel Harris. In his left hand, he carried a sealed executive file marked with a burgundy stripe, the same shade as Marcus Ellison's tie. The hallway seemed to inhale and forget to let go. Claire turned toward him with visible relief, mistaking rank for rescue. Director Harris, she said quickly, her voice returning to its polished authority. Thank you. We have an unauthorized individual on the executive floor, and I need him removed before the board meeting begins. Daniel Harris did not answer her right away. His eyes moved past Claire, past the two officers, past Paige at the reception console, past Evan Brooks standing rigid with the reports still pressed to his chest. Then his gaze landed on Marcus. Something in his face changed, but only slightly. The professional mask did not fall. It became stiller, more careful. Marcus saw recognition before anyone else understood it. He also saw the question behind it. Why are you standing out here? For one long second, neither man spoke. The silence opened wide enough for every small sound to become enormous. The heating vent breathed above them. The red light on the phone console blinked steadily, urgent, and ignored. A coffee cup cooled near the espresso machine, steam thinning into nothing. Outside the windows, Manhattan moved as if none of this mattered. Yellow cabs crawling far below, office lights glowing across the avenue, a pale winter sky pressing against the glass. Marcus stood with his briefcase in his right hand and the visitor badge now missing from his lapel. Without the badge, he looked even less like what the building expected and even more like what it feared to admit. Claire stepped closer to Harris, lowering her voice, but not enough to keep others from hearing. He claimed to be expected by the board. He refused standard direction, questioned my authority, and created a disruption during a confidential transition. Harris finally looked at her. His expression remained calm, but there was no agreement in it. Did anyone verify his appointment? Claire stiffened. We were in the process of securing the floor. That was not my question. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of procedure properly used. Claire's face tightened. The two officers looked at the carpet. Paige's hand hovered over the phone console again. Evan lifted his eyes, just a little. Marcus watched Harris with a feeling he did not show. He had met the man only once before, 2 weeks earlier, in a temporary office downtown, when the transition team reviewed facility protocols, threat assessments, and executive movement plans. Harris had been direct, precise, respectful. A former United States Marine, 20 years in corporate security, not easily impressed, not easily shaken. Marcus had chosen to keep his first arrival low profile. No media, no crowd, no ceremonial welcome. He wanted to see the company before the company performed for him. Now the answer stood around him in navy wool, white marble, lowered eyes, and a young intern learning what silence cost. Harris shifted the file under his arm and took one slow step toward Marcus. Claire seemed to sense the room slipping away from her, because she spoke again, faster this time. Director, with respect, we cannot let unknown visitors stand outside the boardroom with confidential materials present. He had a folder labeled transition materials. Anyone could have printed that. I made the safest call for the company. Marcus looked down at the briefcase, at the softened leather darkened by years of his father's hands and his own. He thought of the letter inside, the careful handwriting, the sentence that had carried him across bridges and through doors that opened only halfway. Walk into every room like you belong there, son, but never forget who they refuse to see. The words did not make him bitter. They made him steady. He lifted his eyes to the portraits behind Claire, the old row of faces watching from polished frames. For decades, Men in those frames had defined belonging by resemblance. Same schools, same clubs, same voices at the same tables. Harrington Global had nearly collapsed under that comfort. Marcus had not come to decorate its history. He had come to interrupt it. Harris stopped 3 feet in front of him. The hallway became so quiet that even Claire did not move. Marcus could feel every stare now, not as pressure, but as witness. The shame in the officers' lowered faces. The fear in Paige's hands. The fragile courage in Evan's eyes. The disbelief beginning to crack through Claire's composure. Harris drew himself upright, shoulders squared, file tucked firmly against his side. His right hand lifted, not quickly, not theatrically, but with complete certainty. Before the salute fully formed, Marcus saw Claire understand that the mistake had not just been procedural. It had been moral. And in the breath before the truth became public, the entire 42nd floor stood suspended between who it had been and who it was about to become. Harris's salute completed in the clean stillness of the hallway, precise and unmistakable, his palm angled with the discipline of a man who knew exactly whom he was honoring. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," he said, his voice carrying across the marble floor and through the glass partitions. "Welcome to Harrington Global, sir." For a moment, no one breathed loudly enough to be heard. The 2-floor officers froze where they stood, their faces changing from procedure to realization. Paige's hand dropped away from the phone console. Evan Brooks lowered the reports from his chest, as if he had forgotten he was holding them. Claire Whitmore stood less than 10 feet away, her polished expression cracking so quietly that it was almost worse than if she had gasped. Marcus returned the salute with a small nod, not military, not ceremonial, simply respectful. "Good morning, Director Harris." Harris lowered his hand and extended the sealed executive file. "The board has been trying to reach reception. They are assembled and waiting for you." The words fell one by one, each of them removing another layer of Claire's certainty. "Board. Waiting. You." Marcus took the file, the burgundy stripe flashing under the ceiling lights. Claire looked from the file to Harris, then to Marcus's empty lapel where the visitor badge had been taken minutes earlier. Her throat moved, but no sound came at first. The younger officer still had the badge in his palm. He looked at it as if it had suddenly become dangerous for a different reason, then stepped forward quickly. "Mr. Ellison, I am sorry," he said, holding it out. Marcus accepted it without making him suffer. "Thank you." That quiet reply seemed to sting more than anger would have. The officer stepped back, eyes lowered. Harris turned to Claire, and his tone remained professional, which made it harder to hide from. "Ms. Whitmore, this is Marcus Ellison, the incoming Chief Executive Officer of Harrington Global and the principal architect of the transition plan you were briefed on this morning." Claire's face lost color beneath the office lights. "I was not given a photograph," she said, and the sentence sounded small the instant it left her mouth. Marcus looked at her, not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with the full weight of having been seen too late. "No," he said. "You were given a name, a time, a secured floor access notice, and the chance to check." The boardroom door opened behind them. First came Leonard Voss, the interim chairman, silver-haired and thin, his reading glasses still in one hand. Behind him appeared 3 directors, then 2 attorneys, then a woman from the transition team, who stopped so abruptly that the folder under her arm slipped slightly. The line of executives took in the hallway like people arriving after the verdict, but before anyone had said the sentence aloud. Leonard's eyes moved from Marcus to Harris to Claire, and his expression tightened. "Marcus," he said, walking forward quickly. "We were calling reception. What happened?" The question entered the air, but no one rushed to answer. That was the strange mercy of truth. It did not need to hurry. It stood there in every detail. The removed badge, the open briefcase, the 2 officers standing too still, the urgent red light still blinking on Paige's console, the young intern watching with a courage that had cost him more than anyone in the room knew. Marcus adjusted the cuff of his shirt with one slow movement. "I was delayed at reception." Leonard looked at Claire. "Delayed how?" Claire opened her mouth, but Marcus spoke first. "Ms. Whitmore questioned my access. I asked her to verify my appointment. She declined." A cold quiet passed through the directors. One of the attorneys looked down at the floor. Harris added, "Security was called before verification was completed." Marcus did not look away from Claire. "My briefcase was inspected. My badge was taken. I was being escorted out. Leonard's jaw set. Claire. Her name sounded different now, stripped of title and protection. Claire's eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with the sudden pressure of someone realizing the room she had controlled was no longer arranged around her version of events. I believed I was protecting the company, she said. Marcus nodded once. That is what many people call it when they protect the company from the people they have already decided do not belong in it. No one moved. Outside the window, morning traffic slid between towers 42 floors below, distant and soundless. Marcus lifted his briefcase, now closed again, and walked toward the boardroom. At the doorway, he stopped. Beside Evan, the young intern straightened as if caught doing something wrong. Marcus looked at the bent reports in his hands. What is your name? Evan Brooks, sir. Thank you for telling the truth, Evan. Evan blinked, and for the first time that morning, his shoulders loosened. Marcus then turned back to the assembled executives, to Harris, to the officers, to Claire standing alone near the reception desk. Let us begin, he said. Then he entered the boardroom, not as a guest who had been allowed in, but as the man the room had been waiting for all along. Inside the boardroom, Marcus did not sit down right away. The chair at the head of the table had been pulled out for him, its dark leather catching a clean line of morning light from the windows, but he stood behind it with one hand resting on the back and the other holding his father's briefcase. Around the table, the directors settled into a silence that did not feel like respect yet. It felt like shock wearing a suit. Leonard Voss remained near the doorway, his face tight with embarrassment. The attorneys opened their folders and then closed them again, uncertain whether paper still mattered after what they had just witnessed. Through the glass wall, Claire stood alone near reception, her navy suit still perfect, her posture still upright, but the certainty had drained from her body so completely that she seemed smaller than she had 10 minutes earlier. Marcus looked at every face before he spoke. Before we discuss margins, debt recovery, client retention, or the first 100 days of this transition, we are going to discuss what happened outside this room. No one interrupted. That alone told him plenty. Powerful people often disliked discomfort until discomfort came from someone they could not dismiss. He placed the sealed executive file on the table, but he did not open it. Harrington Global nearly failed because it trusted appearance more than truth. It rewarded familiar voices. It promoted comfortable judgment. It confused confidence with competence, silence with agreement, and access with worth. A director near the far end shifted in his chair. Marcus continued. This morning, I entered. Through the lobby with proper clearance. I stated my appointment. I requested verification. Instead of verification, security was called. Leonard lowered his eyes. Marcus, I apologize on behalf of the board. Marcus turned to him. An apology may begin the repair, Leonard, but it cannot replace the repair. The sentence settled over the walnut table. Outside, Paige finally answered the flashing line and spoke in a whisper to someone downstairs. Harris stood just inside the boardroom door, hands folded, present but silent. Marcus looked toward him. Director Harris, was the response outside consistent with written access policy? Harris answered without hesitation. No, sir. Verification should have been completed before any removal request. The younger attorney wrote that down. Marcus then looked through the glass at Evan Brooks, still standing near the copy station with the bent reports. Bring Evan in, please. Harris stepped out and returned with the intern, whose face showed fear, confusion, and something close to disbelief. Evan stopped just inside the doorway. Sir, I can go back to work if you need me to. Marcus gestured to an empty chair along the wall. You are working. Sit. Evan sat slowly, holding the reports on his knees like a shield. Marcus turned back to the board. This company will not be rebuilt by people who only speak when it is safe. Mr. Brooks spoke when it was not safe. That matters. Evan stared down, but his eyes shone. Claire, still outside, heard the words through the open door, and her expression changed again. Shame was there now, but beneath it something more difficult had begun to appear. Recognition. Marcus looked at Leonard. Ask Ms. Whitmore to join us. A minute later, Claire entered the boardroom. Her heels made soft, measured sounds against the carpet, but every step seemed to cost her. She stopped several feet from Marcus, not close enough to claim familiarity, not far enough to hide. Mr. Ellison, she said, her voice controlled but thinner than before, I owe you an apology. Marcus did not rescue her from the weight of saying it. He waited. Claire swallowed. I made an assumption. I treated you as a threat. Instead of verifying who you were, I used my position to make that assumption official. That was wrong. The room stayed quiet. Marcus studied her, not to punish her, but to measure whether her words had roots. You embarrassed me, he said. But embarrassment is not the deepest harm. The deeper harm is that everyone out there knew what was happening, and most of them had been trained by this culture to stay silent. Claire nodded once, and this time there was no defense in it. Yes. Marcus opened the executive file at last. Effective today, Harrington Global will begin an independent review of executive floor access incidents, complaint records, promotion patterns, and security escalation procedures from the past 5 years. We will create a workplace dignity policy with mandatory bias training, anonymous reporting, and protection for employees who speak up. No manager will be allowed to hide behind judgment that they cannot explain in policy. One of the directors exhaled slowly. Marcus looked at Claire again. You will cooperate fully with that review. You will also meet with human resources and with the employees affected by the culture you helped enforce. Your future here will not depend on how sorry you sound today. It will depend on what you are willing to change after today. Claire's eyes lowered, then lifted. I understand. Marcus finally pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. The room seemed to rearrange itself around that simple movement. Not because he had taken power, but because he had refused to use it the way it had been used against him. Good, he said. Now let us build a company where no one has to be saluted before they are treated like a human being.